In this video, we are going to take a look at the vendor module in Control Center. Under vendors, we have 3 tabs. The default vendors tab gives us a line-by-line list of all the vendors we have entered in the system that we order or receive from. The EDI Setup tab is for any vendors that are capable of performing EDI invoicing and ordering. This is where we go to add up some of the details for that. This last tab is FTP Connections, which is in relation to the EDI setup. This is where we go to set up the actual server connection for doing EDI with one of our vendors. Under the Main Vendors tab, when we click Add New, it takes us to the Create Vendor page. In the Create a Vendor page, the Details tab will request all the details for a new vendor. The only required field is the name. Underneath that is a field for notes for this vendor. Minimum order amount allows you to set a minimum required order before the system will allow you to submit an order to this vendor. Accounting export code will allow you to input an accounting code if you use them for tracking vendor information. This code will be associated with the exported data for this vendor. You can toggle on and off whether items are returnable for this vendor. Do Not Export determines whether information regarding this vendor is included in exports. You can set this vendor as active or inactive. Apply Auto EDI Auto determines whether EDI invoices are automatically applied upon being received or not. You can turn on Keep Track of Backorder, and this will add items that were backordered to your next order. EDI Filters is the next tab. So if you are participating in EDI with this vendor, you are able to automatically exclude vendor part numbers that will be ignored during the EDI processing. We can also exclude EDI accounts, so if you have an account number set up with your vendors, the system will ignore the account numbers that you type here when processing those files. The last tab is Contact. This is where you will put all the relative contact information for your vendors. Manage Assignment is a very consistent feature throughout the rest of Control Center, and this is what we use to assign stores attached to this vendor. Now if we save the vendor that we're creating here, we'll be able to perform orders and invoices for this vendor. After that, if we save, then we'll be able to see the new vendor line here. The next section is EDI Setup. This is where we'll be able to set the details of EDI ordering and invoicing. So if we click Add New, we can select the location that this EDI is going to be set up for. Let's say we select Store 1, and then we select the vendor that we're setting this up for. Once we have those 2 drop-downs selected, underneath we have 2 tabs. We have the Invoice Settings and Order Settings. Whenever we are receiving an invoice via EDI, we need to select the correct format that the vendor is sending it in. That information will be provided by the vendor alongside their FTP information. This is going to be information that is required from your vendor prior to setting this up. Additionally, we do have the sample button here that you can click, and it will give you a pop-up with all the details of that format. We also have a download button here. So if you have any vendors that are requesting specific format information, you can download it and give it to them if necessary. We have quite a few invoice formats. After we select the format that's necessary for processing invoices, we go down the list. No other information on this section is required unless it's required by the vendor. We'll type in the account number here, and the rest are specific settings for those particular invoice formats. Whatever is necessary to process those files, we'll just come in here, select those settings so that we can use the filter and get the file and get the invoice number. Underneath that, we have connection settings. This is where we actually select the FTP server that is going to be sending and receiving those EDI files. Once that FTP connection is created and saved, it will show on the dropdown here. We can just select it. You can click the Add button and create that FTP connection here, as long as you have those credentials. If the FTP server uses subfolder to send and receive those files, then we would check Yes here, and then we can type in that subfolder. After all that's done, we have a test invoice connection that is going to ping that FTP server and make sure that it is able to log in and do what it needs to do to access that server. Flipping over to the Order Settings tab, it's actually almost the exact same layout here. We select the format that the vendor needs to receive with those orders. Account number is for if you have warehouse enabled. We can even type in the warehouse number ID or prefix, and then going down to the connection settings, it's the very same example as invoice settings. Here we just select FTP connection, and if it needs to go to a subfolder, we check that to yes. Then we type in that subfolder. The next tab is going to be FTP connections. This one is actually pretty simple. This is where we add the servers for EDI ordering. We can click Add New at the top and give it a name. Typically, depending on the vendor, if you have multiple that do EDI, you'll give it a name of that vendor. Then the method, whether it's an empty FTP server, a secure FTP server, or an active FTP. The port number, FTP site, and then the username and password or login credentials for that FTP. After that, we have a little test button that you can click on, and just to make sure that the system is able to make the connection, you get a success message. You just click the save buttons up here at the top, and you have your FTP connection saved, and you're able to proceed with the rest of your EDI setup.